What heroic traits does a traditional war hero exhibit?
Richard Lovelace was an English poet in the 17th century. He was a cavalier poet who fought on behalf of the king during the Civil War. His best known works are To Althea from Prison and To Locusta Going to War. In Locusta Going to War, there are many heroic traits that the traditional war hero exhibits. In the story, it basically shows that there is a man that is in love with a woman, but he realizes that he loves his honor more, so he goes and decides to fight in the war. He discusses how he loves her, but he still must go on and fight. He states that, I could not love thee, dear, so much, loved I not honor more. This shows the selflessness that he possesses and that he has to choose between his own country and his own relationship. Throughout this text, we can see that the man has the bravery to go into war and fight instead of staying with his mistress that loves him dear. Knowing that they are going to die in the war, they see it as a sacrifice for the people of their country, which shows the bravery and courage that these heroes have.
The Song of Mud was written by Mary Borden, who was a nurse during World War I, as well as she contributed in World War II. She talks about the horrors that she saw firsthand in the trenches of World War I, and how the battlefields were covered in mud and the trenches were full of rats and that covered the food, and as well as diseases that took over the living of the soldiers. Throughout the story, they discuss how bad the conditions the soldiers have to fight in, and how the mud consumes them and covers them head to toe and brings them down. And basically every person was covered in mud, and it got everywhere in every aspect of their life, even their food and on top of their guns and everything. When they died, their mud just covered their bodies on the field and there were no traces left. This basically discusses how going to war is not only risking your lives for the country, but you're also living in terrible conditions. The majority of the time it talks about how they're covered in mud from every aspect of their lives and they have to sacrifice a lot. And this connects to the prompt of how a traditional war hero just demonstrates heroic traits because they have the bravery to go and live like this. A quote from the poem is, "Our men have gone into it, sinking slowly and struggling and slowly disappearing," which shows how the men were brave enough to go and risk their lives.
Wilfred Owen was an English poet during World War I who was deeply affected by his service to and injuries by the war. His poem, Dulce et decorum est, is Latin for "it is sweet and honorable." A quote from the poem that describes the soldiers' conditions is the first line, "Bent double like old beggars living under sacks. The men were offering their own lives for the safety of others, but were living in terrible conditions." Owen tells of his own experience watching people die by poison gas. "As under a green sea, I saw him drowning." Even in their dreams, the men struggle to find peace as the soldiers begin getting consumed by paranoia about the gas. Many men are slowly killed by the terrible weapon. People who had good lives before the war chose to give it up and live like beggars and even die for their country. In gruesome detail, Owen describes the horrors they faced like the gas, and the pain that they endured until their final breath. The poem exemplifies sacrifice and bravery as two key characteristics of a hero.
Alfred Lord Tennyson was a very well-respected English poet, and he wrote a series of poems to honor his dead friend. In the charge of the Light Brigade, 600 people rode into the Valley of Death, and they knew they were going to die, and that it wasn't the right tactic, but they did it for honor, and still ran into the battlefield. People who are still alive should honor the people that fought for us. One heroic characteristic seen in this poem is persistence. In the quote, "Then they rode back, but not the 600. It shows persistence, as the soldiers wouldn't give up easily. They were willing to keep on going and risk their lives for their country. Harry Patch fought in the World War, became the last British survivor of World War I. He represented all ordinary men who served in World War I. He received 3 medals for his service. Throughout the war, more people were recognized because of him. The quote, "He came to represent the generation of ordinary men who served in the First World War," represents Patch, as he was a great representation of all heroes. He was an ordinary man, but still a hero. And it just shows how anyone can become a hero. Hero characteristics. After looking at all the poems, we see different types of heroes and their characteristics: sacrifice, bravery, boldness, persistence, and humbleness. All of these soldiers carry these characteristics.